You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast. Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 47 of the Common Descent Podcast.
47. Getting up there.
Right? It's a big number. It's also November. So
Yes.
Welcome everyone to November. The year's almost over. In this episode, we are talking about early synapsids.
Cool.
What does that mean? Okay, so synapsids are a group of vertebrate animals. A very large group of vertebrate animals that today includes only one group, the mammals.
Yarp.
But mammals are not the only synapsids that have ever existed.
No.
And for the better part of 100 million years before mammals evolved, synapsids, non-mammalian synapsids, were the dominant vertebrate life on land on the planet Earth.
Yeah, which is a weird concept because we're used to mammals being in charge now, but there was a time when synapsids were also in charge, but not mammals.
Yep.
Which is cool.
So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to be focusing on this group that, for now, I'll use the word Proto-Mammals.
Proto.
And then we'll talk a bit more about that terminology and naming in a little bit. Really cool group of animals, really cool time period in Earth history, so it'll be a lot of fun to talk about the variety and the evolution of that sequence. Also, this has been requested a lot.
Yeah, this has been a popular topic, which is good, because I feel like these animals get overlooked sometimes.
I agree. This subject, or subsets of this subject, in some form, this topic has been requested by Jake, Eric, Jaster, David, Nils, and Carly. Thank you to all of them.
The Synapsid Gang.
The Synapsid Gang. Thanks, Synapsid Gang. Those are 6 of my favorite synapsids. Before we get into the episode topic, a few announcements. It's November, and as we sometimes like to remind people, every month that this podcast continues to exist is in thanks, large part, to our patrons.
Mm-hmm.
Whose support helps keep this going. And if you're a patron at a certain level, we will call your name out on the podcast. This episode, we have 3 names to call out. Welcome to the patron fold to Aspen, Alexandra, and Hans.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. If you'd like to consider being a patron, head on over to patreon.com and look at Common Descent Podcast.
To your local Patreon.
Head over to your local Patreon, to your local computer, and type www. Patreon.com. All one word. Common Descent Podcast. Oh, these are old people jokes.
Yeah, oh boy.
You remember back in the day. In other things, we, as October has been finished, we have wrapped up our Spookulative Evolution series.
Yeah.
A marvelous experiment run by our friend Will on the other side of this call.
So much fun.
It was great. If you haven't listened to that, check it out. We speculated on the evolution of some fun monsters for the month of October. Listen in, let us know if you like it, and maybe we'll do some more around this time next year.
You'll have to really speak up if you want to stop me from doing it next year.
And before we wrap up the year, we had so much fun earlier in the year answering questions from our listeners. Mm-hmm. We're going to do another Q&A.
Absolutely.
So keep an eye out. Around the time this episode comes out, we'll start posting links to a submission form where you can submit questions you want to ask us. And we'll do at the end of the year, we'll do a Q&A wrap-up episode where we'll just answer a bunch of our listeners' questions.
Yeah, it'll be awesome.
So keep an eye out for that. And I do declare that is all of the announcements for this episode.
That was the speediest announcements we've had in a while.
It is. We don't have any big projects happening right now. Our project is to get sleep. Well, that means that it's time for the news. Every episode here at the Common Descent Podcast, we like to pick some recent news from science of our interest, paleontology, evolution, things like that, And now, before we get into our main event for the episode, we go over to the news desk with Will. Will?
I am here with a bit of news, very recent bit of news, only a few days old by this recording, of the discovery of a new species of crocodile.
Sounds fascinating.
It sure is, especially to me.
Now, you don't mean a new fossil species.
No, a new today species. So this is not paleo, and it is not some discovery about the evolution of an animal as much as it is realizing that a crocodile we thought we knew is something slightly different.
Ah, well, there's something you don't get every day.
Yeah. In fact, not every day since about 85 years ago. Now, the research we're looking at here is by Shirley et al. In Zootaxa, and we will be linking it to a Nat Geo article by Douglas Main. And this is talking about a newly described species of slender snout crocodile, the African slender snout crocodile, that up till now was thought to be but one species, is actually two.
Ooh.
Yeah. So the African slender snout crocodile is not new to being redefined taxonomically. It actually recently, by the early 2000s, was just put in its own genus, Mesetops. And before that had just been within Crocodilus, the rest of the crocodiles. And they realized it was different enough to be its own genus. Mesetops cataphractus is the West African slender snout crocodile. And through DNA analysis, they were able to identify it as its own genus. This is a pretty standard crocodile, except it does have a very slender muzzle, as the name suggests. They're medium-sized, under 10 feet typically, so not small, not big, and are typically going after small aquatic prey items, fish and frogs and crustaceans and stuff like that. They are located throughout the western central area of Africa, pretty wide span, and are occupying swampy and river systems. So, typical crocodile stuff. This population, though, has been looked at by the researchers, and once again, mostly due to DNA analysis, we're able to identify that the easterly portion of this population is actually a separate species.
Oh.
Still within Mesetops, so same genus, but a new species. This new species has been designated Mesetops leptorhynchus and is the central African slender snout crocodile, since it is more toward the interior of the continent. Going to look very similar. It has a few physical characteristics that set it apart that probably you wouldn't notice at a glance, but upon analysis they found that consistently the central slender snout is smoother skin, at least in appearance, whilst the western has much more prominent scales and protuberances. And also the central one lacks the crests that the western one has on the head.
Interesting.
So, little slight details. The DNA, though, is what really tells the tale. So, whilst looking at the DNA, it showed that these two species diverged roughly about 8 million years ago.
Wow.
So, a ways back. And this is where it gets interesting. This is about the same time that volcanoes in their region began to rise up. And so it seems that the cause of this separation was due to the construction of these volcanoes.
Ah, an allopatric speciation.
Yes.
They were physically separated from each other.
Volcanoes rose up in the middle of the slender snout population, the range, and separated them. And as far as their research shows, they have not been able to interbreed between one another over the last 8 million years, and it's allowed them to diverge.
Very cool.
Yeah. This is significant for two big reasons, other than just being awesome that we're identifying a new crocodile. But it is also the first full species identification of a new crocodile since 1935. And that's significant because the process of naming new species is not a simple one. And they went through all the steps, so much so that they had to actually identify a new type specimen for the western slender snout crocodile, because the original had been destroyed during Nazi bombing of London's Natural History Museum, most likely.
Wow. So the type specimen, of course, is the quintessential example of a species.
The one that the species is named off of and the description is made off of.
Yeah. So they not only had to designate a holotype for the new species, but in order to differentiate it, they had to come up with a new one, which I think is a neotype.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And
that's cool.
They even said that the type specimen for the central slender snout, it was actually a juvenile, which gave them an extra layer of complications to make sure that their characteristics they were using are valid for the species as a whole.
Right.
So a lot of time and effort put into fully identifying and going through the process of naming. Now, this is not to say that new crocodile species have not been identified since 1935, but none of them have gone through this official, formal naming process.
Interesting.
The dwarf crocodile has been identified to be most likely either multiple, probably up to 3 subspecies or separate species. And the Nile crocodile has been realized to be separate from the Western African crocodile or desert crocodile. So we've identified that there are multiple species within populations before, but the formal naming process and identifying of type specimens has not happened for those yet. Which is why you'll often see numbers for crocodiles being between 23 and 26 crocodilians.
Right.
Because some of these are still in limbo.
And this is fun because we talked in our last episode 46, about cryptozoology.
Yes.
About discovery of new large species.
Mm-hmm.
And this is often how it happens, the last century or so. If we discover a new species of large animal, it tends to be a species that was in plain sight.
Yes.
And we just didn't recognize.
We just didn't notice that it was actually different because it looked similar enough at a glance. The thing that makes this really interesting as well is it actually adjusted the conservation status of the Western slender snout, which...
Oh, I'm sure.
The entire population had been believed to be Western slender snout crocodile. Now with this new identification, that actually cuts their population down to an estimated 500 wild individuals.
Ooh.
And puts them at the critically endangered level.
Ooh.
So we identified that a portion of this population was a new species. We identified a new type specimen for the Western and had realized that it is in much greater danger of extinction than we had previously thought. So this made a bunch of shifts with a seemingly simple discovery that took a lot of work and research.
Yeah. It means there's more diversity and danger than we realized. It's not just a portion of a species, it's a whole species that is in trouble.
Yes.
Very interesting stuff.
It's exciting.
Well, my first bit of news is about fossils. We're talking dinosaurs, because hardly an episode goes by without some dinosaur talk.
Yeah, people like those.
This is a bit of research that discovers the wrong kind of teeth in a dinosaur's mouth.
It's wearing the wrong dentures.
It's going to be weird. This is research that has not been published, but was presented by Mark Goodwin et al. At SVP, which happened just recently in mid to late October. The meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. If you want to hear more about that, listen to episode 17 for last year's meeting. And we'll link to an article in National Geographic by John Pickrell. Goodwin et al. Presented on a new juvenile skull of Pachycephalosaurus.
Cool.
Pachycephalosaurus, very famous dinosaur, the one with the dome on its head and all the knobby bumps and stuff around the back. Classically depicted headbutting each other, though arguably not having maybe done that. That's the conversation for another time. Pachycephalosaurus is also famous because its juvenile skulls have been reinterpreted as the years have gone by as potentially being different species, and now, I think, largely agreed, at least in some circles, to not be different species and just be juveniles of Pachycephalosaurus. This skull has the potential to help us sort that out. This is a Dracorex ontogomorph, which is a great word, right?
I like that.
So that is to say this is the version of juvenile Pachycephalosaurus that has been identified elsewhere as Dracorex, as the genus Dracorex, from the Hell Creek Formation, late Cretaceous. It is the most complete set of Pachycephalosaurus teeth and jaws yet discovered.
Significant.
Including the first known predentary, which is a bone at the front of the jaw in certain dinosaurs like Triceratops and such, I believe, have them as well. So, on the one hand, this is cool because it helps us sort out more of the ontogeny, episode 33, of these dinosaurs, which is helpful for all sorts of reasons, how they grew up as the time went on, how they grew up as they got older, but also because of what they found in the front of the mouth. The teeth in the back of Pachycephalosaurus's mouth are these broad, leaf-shaped teeth that are very classic herbivore teeth, slicing and, mashing up plant material.
Which has always been the image of Pachycephalosaurus up till now.
Absolutely. And it falls right there within the ornithischians, next to the ceratopsians, right? These big herbivorous clade of dinosaurs. Well, when they looked at the front of the jaw, in the front of the dentary bone, they found triangular, blade-like teeth.
Yeah.
Now, the article described them as triangular, blade-like, sharp teeth. But the abstract in the SVP book describes them in a way that, for me, is much more visceral. They are laterally compressed, which is to say side-to-side compressed, like a shark's tooth is like front-to-back compressed, and serrated.
Ooh.
They're serrated teeth.
Yeah.
If you don't recognize that term, grab a steak knife out of the kitchen drawer and look closely at the edge. The edge of a steak knife is not smooth. It's got all those little denticles on it. All those
sawtoothed.
Little bumps. It is sawtoothed. Serrated teeth. Shark teeth are serrated.
Yarp.
Saber-toothed cat canines are serrated, I believe.
Yarp.
Theropod dinosaur teeth are serrated.
Modern-day monitor lizards.
And apparently, Pachycephalosaurus had serrated teeth in the front of its mouth.
That's fantastic.
So similar to theropod dinosaur teeth, right? Meat-eating dinosaur teeth, that a number of paleontologists are quoted in this article as saying, if you just showed me one of those teeth, I would probably have identified it as a theropod.
That's fantastic.
This is ridiculous. What was Pachycephalosaurus doing with these theropod teeth in the front of its mouth?
It's murdering plants.
I guess. Now, not only did it have these serrated blade teeth in the front of its mouth, it still had a beak. So it had a horny beak with serrated teeth inside of it.
Now that's where it gets weird.
What a weird dinosaur. Now, lots is uncertain. On the one hand, is this just a juvenile feature? If we find skulls of more complete skulls of adult Pachycephalosaurus, will we find these teeth still in there, or is this something they grew out of? What exactly are they doing with these teeth is a little bit uncertain. We don't know what their diet was. Maybe they were opportunistic. Maybe they were eating small animals to supplement their plant diet, because those back teeth are still very much herbivorous, functioning teeth. Maybe they were eating different things at different times of the year. All sorts of things can be investigated. The researchers mentioned doing isotope studies or microwear studies on the teeth to sort of see what they might have been using them for. So there's a lot more to be learned here. But my goodness, what a cool find.
That's awesome. It's fairly normal to see different kinds of dentation in mammals. Like, that's one of the things that defines much of the mammal group, is that we have different teeth in different part of the mouth to do different jobs. We have teeth up front for nipping and cutting. We have canines for grabbing onto food, and we have molars in the back for grinding up food. We don't see that in a lot of other groups. It's cool when dinosaurs show it, because there are some that will show this feature, and that's a really cool thing to see show up there, because then it immediately brings to mind that they probably also had extremely complex feeding and diets, just like mammals can, which is
absolutely
awesome.
There's also a note in the article that quotes other paleontologists pointing out that there are a lot of fossil sites where we have identified isolated theropod teeth. Isolated meaning they're by themselves. They're not with another, they're not with the skull. It's just a tooth you found. And now you got some people going, right, well, maybe those aren't all theropod teeth.
Oh, son of... It's just, I get a picture of someone looking at this skull and then looking at the drawer of isolated theropod teeth and going, Huh.
Call the undergraduates.
And you'll be looking at this tooth, and you'll be looking at this tooth. You'll be looking at this tooth. Yeah, that's something that can really rewrite things when you suddenly realize an animal had a feature that previously had not preserved.
So I'm excited to hear more from this.
I'd love that if they were nipping or eating little bits of meat to supplement, especially since they're up front. So it like going after small things or picking off carrion be really cool. Awesome. Well, my next news piece is written up in Nat Geo.
We're really into National Geographic.
We really are. I had not paid attention when you said which news you were doing that you also had a Nat Geo. This is the oldest footprint trackway, fossilized trackway, yet discovered in the Grand Canyon from a little quadruped walking in a really weird way.
I like this already.
It's really interesting. Now, this is research also presented at SVP recently, so it is not yet published out there, but it was by Stephen Rowland and Mario Caputo, and this is a trackway that was actually discovered basically by accident. In 2016, just a couple years ago, a group of paleontology students was being led by one of the friends of the researchers, and while they were hiking through the canyon, they came across an area where there had been a rock fall. A portion of the wall had tumbled, and one of the boulders had split as it fell or landed, and it split along a seam, which is what often happens when you see like shale fossil sites and they're splitting open those slabs to reveal fossils in between the layers of rock.
Right.
This happened here, but naturally. It just split along one of those layer seams and revealed a trackway of footprints counting 28 individual prints that formed a little pathway about a yard long.
What a cool way to find a fossil.
Yeah. The paleontologists contacted the park officials as well as Rowland to let them both know what had been found. They came and looked at it and then came back to do some research and are now still researching it to try to piece together the full picture. But their initial findings already show some cool stuff. It is an old trackway, about 310 million years old. So this is from the Carboniferous period. And this is a time when the earliest ancestors of reptiles and amphibians were starting to show up. And this is a would have been a medium-ish to smallish sized animal. Quadruped, so four-legged, and shows similar proportions, potentially to be early ancestor of reptiles or something similar or close to that. But that's based off of other trackways with similar sizes and characteristics. So that one, they're still not sure who made the trackway, which we've talked about before. You can't actually identify specifically what species left the footprints, but they're not sure who it is in general. So that's still going to be looked into. The thing that does stand out about this is it was made in sand, and these trackways are walking in the sand in a really weird way. They aren't walking in a straight line. They are walking at an angle. So each of the footprints is actually at a 40 degrees away from the actual path that the animal was following. So it was walking on a diagonal.
Yeah.
This is super weird. The article has a really great picture of them reconstructing the steps that they would have to take to form this. And basically it would take its front right and back left foot and move them forward and to the right, and then follow with the other 2 feet. And then bring those first 2 feet over to the right and forward again, and doing this little sidestep shimmy as it walked. Now, there are multiple reasons it could have been walking this way, but they're not sure which one it is. They'll have to take a more detailed look at the fossil to try to figure out which one of these reasons it might be. The first ideas they had was that it could have been walking into a wind, a strong headwind, and been leaning into it kind of thing.
That did not occur to me, and I think that's awesome.
Right? I did not think of that. The other one is the one I thought of, is that it was walking on a slope of a dune, and this was helping it avoid slipping. So it's like when you walk down a hill at a angle instead of walking straight down it, so that you're not going head first at a steep angle. It was
Yeah.
it was taking a little sidewalk down a hill so that it didn't slide down a dune. Because this would have been a very deserty environment it was in, so it might have slipped in that sand. Kind of like a Sidewinder is what it made me think of.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
Which one that is, they will have to look in. They will not know for sure. The next step that they're hoping to follow this research up with, or continue this research with more accurately, is to look at the exposure characteristics of the sandstone. And if it's preserved well enough, it might actually be able to tell them at what position on the dunes these footprints were left. If it was at the top or edge, or at the trench in between dunes. Because then it will tell them, if it's at the bottom of the dunes in between two, it's not slipping around, so it must be doing something else.
Yeah.
So that's their next step to hopefully figuring out why this shimmying animal was shimmying.
That's super cool.
Right?
I like that trace fossils, ichnofossils, can preserve just completely out of nowhere things.
Yes.
And trackways are so weird because, we have this picture in our head of you step in the ground, you leave a footprint. But how often do animals walk normally?
Yeah.
Think about all the various reasons you take a weird step or you walk in a strange way throughout the day, where you stumble over something or you just happen to walk weird for some reason.
But if you just track your footprints, how often would people watch your footprints go in a direction, stop, and then turn around and go back the way you came because you forgot something? There'd be tons of times
around something.
Mm-hmm.
Your footprints throughout the day would look super weird. So when we get
board walking, where you're walking on patterns in the floor or on avoiding cracks,
So it's just fascinating to get these little videos. A trackway is a little video, a little GIF of this moment in this animal's life, which is just super weird and cool.
That's always the cool thing about trackway fossils is the actual remains, and the researchers said as much. The actual remains tell you a lot about the animal. This is actually captured a moment in the life of whatever animal this was. And that's something you don't get from the bones typically. So that's really cool.
Now, my next bit of news is going to go even further back in time.
We must go deeper.
We must go deeper to the middle to early Paleozoic. Will, if I were to ask you, what oceanic habitat do you think is the best hotspot for diversification? What sort of marine ecosystem would you think is where the most evolution is happening at any given time?
If I was a betting person, reefs would be high up.
Reef seems like the obvious answer.
Absolutely.
That would be my guess too.
Yeah.
And indeed, today, we know reefs are super important for diversity. Fish and invertebrates, reefs are the rainforests of the oceans.
Rainforests of the seas, absolutely.
We know from fossil studies that invertebrates often diversify in reef zones. So that's where you see new body types and things showing up in the past. And it kind of has been assumed, like Will and I are assuming, that is also true for vertebrates.
Yeah.
This next bit of news is a study that investigates that claim and finds otherwise.
Scandalous.
This is a bit of research by Lauren Salon et al. In Science, and we'll be linking to a press release in Penn Today, which is put out by the University of Pennsylvania, which is where Dr. Salon is.
Not Nat Geo.
Not Nat Geo. Not Nat Geo. Salon and colleagues took records of approximately 2,700 early vertebrate taxa, and when we're talking early vertebrates, we mean fish. All sorts of different fish, sharks, bony fish, jawless fish, from approximately 480 to 360 million years ago throughout the early to middle Paleozoic, and created a model to try to track where the different groups of fish, where the different major clades were originating.
Cool.
What habitats did the base of each clade, the first members of each new major branch, live?
That's really cool.
Yeah, they say, where did the earliest sharks live? Where did the earliest placoderms and so on and so on?
Literally, where did they get their start?
Yes. And what they found very consistently in almost every big branch of the early vertebrate family tree.
Come on, reefs. Come on, reefs.
Not reefs. Was not reefs. They originated in near-shore environments, shallow tidal areas like lagoons.
Oh.
This is where the diversification was happening. This is where you would see new species, new body types showing up, and they would spread out from there.
Interesting.
So they would diversify in these nearshore environments, new body plans would show up, and those would go out. And in fact, they found some trends in what kinds of body forms went to other places.
Ooh, that's cool.
That when they diversified into robust forms, right, bigger, beefier fish, those stayed near shore or moved closer inshore, and the more gracile, the more slender forms moved into deeper waters.
Huh, neat.
That these lagoon tidal areas are the centers of diversification consistently through early vertebrate clades.
That is really, really fascinating. My second guess on diversification would have been shallow seas, since those are such a boon for diversification and species,
right.
health. I would not have guessed lagoons specifically for shallow areas necessarily. That's really cool.
And this raises the question of why that is, and we don't know. It also raises the question of whether or not this is still true.
Yeah.
Are nearshore environments still important centers of diversification?
It's going to be kind of a bummer if the answer is yes, because that's where we like to hang out.
Yeah. But it does potentially answer another question, and that is, why do we have so few fossils at the base of different fish clades? And it may very well be that these tidal, less stable areas are less good for fossilization.
Yeah.
That if you die in that area, the waves are moving the bones around, destroying them, they're not getting buried as well. And so it's possible that this explains why the fossil record tells us so little about these origins of these clades.
That's very, very cool. Those little discoveries and realizations that can open up really big realizations are always very interesting. Like, just shifting where we realize their origin was from. Not to say that this was like a simplistic discovery, but just that shift of not reefs but lagoons could lead to many, many, many more answers about the evolution and fossil history, our knowledge, why it is the way it is. I like those side effect discoveries. That's very cool.
Yeah, it could also potentially tell us where to look.
And if we find out that this remains consistent to today, it's also going to affect conservation-minded stuff. The same reason we are so protective of wetlands, because in terrestrial habitats, wetlands are critical for species diversity. If we realize lagoons are that way, we might be able to start to enforce more protection of those areas.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep. All right, well, that's the news for this episode, which means it is time to get into our discussion of the early synapsids.
Oh boy.
So during the Carboniferous period, around that time that Will's Grand Canyon trackways came from, there was the rise of a group of vertebrate animals called the amniotes.
An important group.
Amniotes are famous for laying amniotic eggs, which are eggs that have all the ingredients within them that you need to be able to survive outside of water.
You take the water with you now.
Yes, this kicked off that major transition from being amphibians tied to the water to being able to go inland.
Mm-hmm.
And in the then forming continent of Pangaea, there was a lot of inland to explore.
This is more than there's been in quite a while.
Yes. The amniotes very quickly split into two major groups. On the one hand, you had the sauropsids.
Yeah.
The sauropsids are more or less equivalent to the word reptile.
Yeah.
Sauropsids would eventually give rise to lizards and snakes, turtles, crocodilians, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs. All those delightful scaly things are on the sauropsid branch of the amniote family tree. The other side were the synapsids. Synapsids are united mainly by having a feature in the skull, a lateral temporal fenestra by itself in the back of the skull.
That's a hole.
It's a hole, it is. A hole where a bunch of bones meet and form this opening in the side of the skull. If you think of your classic T-Rex skull, it's full of holes.
Yes.
Because it's so old, those holes are part of the skull architecture.
Yes.
Synapsids have one on each side behind the eyes, as opposed to diapsid reptiles, which have two behind the eyes, anapsid animals, which have no holes. This is the foundational architecture of the synapsid skull.
Yeah, this is a big part of sorting out amniotes and stands true throughout most of the members in those groups.
Indeed it is. Now, as we mentioned earlier, synapsids would eventually give rise to mammals. Us, including ourselves. But for a very long time, there was a major diversity of synapsid animals well before mammals showed up. And now we get into a little bit of words. This episode was hard to name. I believe it will be called Early Synapsids, parentheses, Proto-Mammals. Proto-Mammals is a handy term, kind of, for basically all of the synapsids up to mammals. In the same way that non-avian dinosaurs is all of the dinosaurs up to birds, right? We're leaving out birds because birds makes us think something different. Non-avian dinosaurs is all the stuff before that.
Yeah.
Proto-Mammals is kind of works there, where it's everything that's a synapsid. It's non-mammalian synapsids. Now, if we were recording this episode, say, 10 or 15 years ago, naming this episode would have been very easy. We would have called it mammal-like reptiles.
Very popular term for quite a while.
Yeah, that's basically what everything up to mammals, non-mammalian synapsids, for a long time were referred to as mammal-like reptiles. But we've kind of stopped using that term because, like I said before, reptiles is kind of confined to the other side of the amniote tree.
Yeah, it's a misleading name.
Yeah. From a time where reptile was considered to basically characterize everything amniote that wasn't bird or mammal.
Yep. Do you got scales and you live on land? Well, reptile.
Well, there you go. And in fact, a number of the requests for this episode were for the reptile-mammal transition.
Yeah.
Because that was very much sort of how it was framed for a long time, that mammals evolved from reptiles, which isn't really quite true.
Yes.
So in this episode, we will be working our way from the base of the synapsids, more or less up to mammals. And along the way, even though we are starting with all synapsids having that lateral temporal fenestra, we will also see the gradual development of very mammalian traits.
Mm-hmm.
Mammals, for example, as you mentioned when we were discussing the news, are famous for having differentiated teeth compared to, lizards and crocs and snakes, which are mostly very samey teeth.
Yeah, or just variations on a theme at most.
Right. Mammals have a secondary palate in the mouth, which is part of an advanced breathing system, a respiratory system that mammals have.
That's the roof of your mouth if you run your tongue up.
Yes, it separates your nose cavity from your mouth cavity.
Yes. So you can breathe while you eat.
Exactly. And that's part of that respiratory system, which also contributes to endothermy, quote, warm-bloodedness, that mammals are famous for. Mammals stand with their legs underneath their bodies, as opposed to sprawling like most reptiles and amphibians do. Mammals have a very unique lower jaw structure.
Yes, we
And
do.
we've talked about this in other episodes that your fish, your lizards, or your fish, your reptiles, your amphibians tend to have many bones in the lower jaw, whereas mammals only have one bone on each side of the lower jaw, the dentary. The mammal jaw joint is where the dentary bone in the lower jaw meets the squamosal bone in the top of the skull, as opposed to what you see in reptiles, which is a bone in the lower jaw called the articular meeting a bone in the top of the jaw called the quadrate.
Yes.
Different joint. And what happened to the articular and the quadrate, I hear you ask? Well, you use them to listen to our podcast.
That's how he heard you ask.
That's how yes, exactly. They became the malleus and the incus, which are the one of the hammer or anvil. I never remember which one is which.
I'm terrible.
I'm sorry. I'm bad at that. Inner ear bones. Mammals have 3 inner ear bones, which is very unique to mammals. All of these traits were absent way in the beginning. We are not at mammals yet. We begin but we will see them gradually appear across the synapsid family tree. So let's start, shall we? We begin our journey
in the beginning.
In the late Carboniferous. At the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. It's a good place to start. The earliest synapsids in the fossil record, the earliest animals with that synapsid skull, show up toward the very end of the Carboniferous, just before about 300 million years ago. In fossils from Nova Scotia, up in northern North America, there are a few species that have been identified as very early synapsids. They include, very famously, a small animal called Archaeothyrus.
Cool name.
Archaeothyrus is cool because if you looked at it from the outside, you would think it was a weird lizard.
Yeah.
It's got that very reptile-y shape, that classic lizard salamander body shape.
Yes.
Right.
Short
Sprawling
legs,
limbs,
long tail.
short legs, long tail, absolutely. In fact, it is from the same fossil locality as some of the earliest reptiles.
Yep.
Which also had that same body shape, because this is before the amniote branches had really diverged from each other very much.
As we said many times when talking about the earliest members of a group, they're going to look a lot alike until differences have set in over time.
Indeed. The only 2 major differences you might notice, one, if you looked inside the head, you'll notice that lateral temporal fenestra that separates the synapsids. And you might also notice that it had teeth in the front of its mouth that were bigger than the rest of the teeth.
Buck-toothed.
Canines.
Oh, that's cool.
It had kind of what we would call caniniform. Teeth toward the front, kind of on the sides, that would have been functioning similarly to your canines. Canines being the big teeth in your mouth, in your dog and cat, and so on.
I'm so glad that that was one of the features we started with.
Yes, it is the beginnings of what's called heterodonty, different types of teeth. There are a few of these early synapsids. There's another one called Echinurpaton, which is cool because it may have had a sail on its back.
Oh, yeah.
The neural spines of the vertebrae being a little bit longer to give it sort of a hump or spine-backed look to it.
Neat.
But aside from, a handful of these differences, what we're looking at is a bunch of early synapsids in the late Carboniferous, very lizard-like, probably all insectivores, eating bugs, maybe eating smaller animals, small vertebrates and such. They probably, these would have definitely laid eggs. Some of them had scutes, many of them may have had scales of some kind. This is the base of the synapsid family tree.
Cool. We got some very toothy, lizardy looking creatures.
Yes. Fun note about eggs. We don't know much about the eggs of these animals because they were, like most reptile eggs today, soft and leathery.
Mm-hmm. I was about to ask.
So they don't fossilize.
Yep.
So, to my knowledge, we do not have any amniote eggs in, I think, the Paleozoic?
Wow, yeah.
At least through a big chunk of it. Like, the whole early segment of amniotic eggs is just not there. Because bird eggs are weird.
Yeah, I was about to say, for anyone who does not know the distinction, the hard eggshell that you're so used to with your morning breakfasts, if you eat eggs, is a Archosaurian trait specifically on the dinosaur side of things.
Yes.
Crocs and snakes and lizards and most turtles and they have more, definitely a shell, and it can still be kind of rigid, but it's not that hard calcified shell. It's more floppy, leathery. You can like feel a baby snake moving around inside its egg if you were to hold it.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
And it's the same kind of eggs that monotremes lay.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
Platypuses and echidnas, the egg-laying mammals.
Soft shells.
Indeed. Now, in the late Carboniferous, the synapsids were but beginning, but the Carboniferous gives way to the Permian period, which we discussed in episode 45 quite a bit. And in the Permian, there was all this landmass ripe to be dominated by a group of terrestrial vertebrates.
Land everywhere, and no one living in it.
Until now. And the group that does it is a major swath of synapsids that are called the pelycosaurs. Yeah. Now, pelycosaurs, let's talk taxonomy again for a second. Pelycosaurs isn't a great scientific term. We talked in episode 10 about sort of how we try to pick our scientific clade names, right? Groups of life. Pelycosaurs is one of those words, also like non-avian dinosaurs, like the Proto-Mammals, that mostly is all the animals that evolved between this point and this point in the tree.
Yeah.
It's not a good monophyletic term. It's kind of a catch-all.
Yes.
In this case, it's a catch-all for most of the synapsids that were successful from the late Carboniferous through the early Permian. In fact, they by far dominated the early Permian.
Cool.
Here are a few of the groups that you would have seen if you had traveled back. Some of them looked a lot like the very earliest forms. There is a family called the Eothyrhidae, members like Eothyrus and Edeliops, which were small insectivores. Like those earlier ones, small lizard-like, with fangs, right? Those big canine teeth.
Saber-toothed lizards.
Saber-toothed lizards, yeah, basically. Some, however, got very large. In fact, some of the first terrestrial animals to ever get really big belonged to a group of pelycosaurs called the Casids. These were large terrestrial herbivores. Some of them were ridiculous sized. Right? Some of them were a meter long, 2 meters long, decent, right? Respectable sized animals.
Absolutely. Like you'd need
6 feet or so.
You'd need a big backyard to have one of these.
Right. Others got quite a bit bigger than that. 3 meters, 4, 5 maybe? Wow. These were very large. Some estimated at in the realm of 300 or 400 pounds.
Wow.
One of the most famous is an animal called Cotylorhynchus, famous from fossil sites in the southern U.S. Casids looked really weird. Notably, they had these big bodies, right? Picture a really tubby lizard that's, in some cases, like Cotylorhynchus, 4, 5, 6 feet tall, walking around on the ground with these tiny little heads.
Yeah.
Slapped onto the front of it.
They spent all their points in the torso and didn't have any left over for the skull.
So they're kind of, when you see them reconstructed, they're kind of look like glyptodonts, the big armored mammals from the Ice Age. But without the armor, and the heads aren't low to the ground, they're higher up.
Yeah.
And they're just super weird. They had big noses, heavy jaws. These were herbivores. These were large terrestrial herbivores. This was the first version of what would later be taken over by things like hadrosaur dinosaurs, cows, and horses and things like that.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as amniotes. Big lumbering animals are good for being herbivores.
They sure are. And as part of that herbivory, perhaps, the Casids did not have those canines.
Yeah.
They reverted. They said, no need for that.
Yeah, that's a waste.
Some of these are thought to have possibly been aquatic forms.
Cool.
Some are thought to have possibly been diggers. So already in the early days of synapsids, we have a variety of ecological roles just within the big herbivores. Outside of the big herbivores, there is another group called the Varanopids. These are cool because their name, They are named in part because of their similarity to varanids, which are monitor lizards.
Good group to be similar to.
It sure is. Now, of course, they're not related to monitor lizards, but their body shape, these were small-ish, maybe up to several feet long, carnivorous or insectivorous animals with long legs, lightweight skeleton. They would have looked like monitor lizards. Sprawling limbs.
Yeah. It's a good design if you are going after other moving animals.
Yes, it is. Indeed, this was a very good design because the Varanopids, like Varanops and its colleagues, were very successful. These are very widespread at this time period.
Cool.
Another of the popular groups are the Ophiachodonts. Also had lots of lizard-like members. Most of these big families, the earliest members are very lizard-like.
And
small insectivores.
It's funny because the popular term used to be mammal-like reptiles. Really, it's more like reptile-like early mammals.
Yeah, reptile-like proto-mammals.
Just get longer and longer.
But some of them got quite different. Ophiachodon, the genus that gives its name to the group, is this, again, picture a tubby lizard, but they had these big heads supported by these massive shoulder muscles.
Bulldog lizards.
Yeah, well, they look like lizards with frog heads.
Yeah, yes, they do.
Kind of big mouths, big heads. Those were almost certainly carnivorous, many of them. There's some evidence that some of them might have been piscivorous, fish eaters.
Cool.
There's even some evidence for bone structure that is similar to what you typically see in semi-aquatic animals.
Oh, all right.
So some of these may have been swimmers as well. So again, we've got this diversity of groups.
They almost make me think of like a Tasmanian devil, where it's just this big head on this not as big body.
Yeah, that's actually very similar. I'm looking at Ophiachodon right now because I put a picture in my notes so that I could describe it. That's not unlike what it looks like.
Yeah. Just
a big Tasmanian devil kind of thing.
Scrappy little biters.
Now, at this point, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, I've never heard of these pelycosaurs. What a strange variety of animals. Well, you've heard of a few, I'm sure.
Once or twice at least.
The other two major groups of the pelycosaurs are both very large and some very famous. The Edaphosauridae were among the largest early terrestrial herbivores, very abundant. These also got 1 meter up to 3 or 4 meters long, so we're talking 10 to 15 feet long.
Significant.
The most famous of them is an animal called Edaphosaurus. Big animal, right? 10, 12, 15 feet long, lizard-like body, small head, big dorsal sail.
Yeah.
The neural spine sticking off the vertebrae went feet off of its back and made this huge sail. A lot of the Edaphosaurs actually had this. Lupiosaurus is another big one that had a very similar size, similar appearance. These are among the first tetrapods known to have had dorsal sails.
They were the trendsetters.
Yeah, they did. This shows up again and again later on. We talked about Spinosaurs in episode 42. These were some of the ones that started it off. Exactly what they were using the sail for has been up for lots of discussion.
Yeah.
The classic answer is thermoregulation.
It was in every book I had as a kid.
Yep, that they're absorbing heat or releasing heat to make sure that they can maintain a certain temperature. It could also be display. It could be sexual display. It could be a number of things. These are herbivores, the Edaphosaurs, with big dorsal sails. And then the final big group of the pelycosaurs are the Sphenacodonts, which were carnivores with big dorsal sails.
Yeah. You've probably heard at least one of the members.
Oh, you sure have. Stick around. These are among the dominant carnivores. So the Sphenacodonts are the biggest carnivores around. Some of them also got 3 meters, 4 meters long. Sphenacodon itself was a 10-foot long predator. And these, instead of the small heads that you see on the Catylorhynchus and the other casids and the Edaphosaurus, these had these big, long, narrow skulls. So think, T-Rex, yeah. Right?
Very good for predation.
Great for biting.
Strong bite with a narrow profile for grabbing and cutting into your meat.
Yep. The teeth up front of the Sphenacodonts were typically big dagger-like teeth, caniniform teeth, and smaller teeth in the back. We're seeing heterodonty, differentiated teeth for different roles. In fact, the different sizes of the teeth are what gave rise to the scientific name, two-sized teeth, Dimetrodon.
Dimetrodon.
Dimetrodon, by far the most famous of the pelycosaurs, probably the most famous non-mammalian synapsid, period.
So famous that it pops up along cartoon dinosaurs everywhere.
It is probably the most famous non-dinosaur dinosaur. If you buy kits of toys, right, those dinosaur toys,
it's in every
they always have
single one.
Dimetrodon. It's the thing with a T-Rex head and a big sail on its back. That's Dimetrodon.
Shows up in Land Before Time and everything.
It sure does. Not a dinosaur, never met a dinosaur, but long before the dinosaurs took over, Dimetrodon was an apex predator.
King on the block.
Early Permian Pangea, that was the predator to be, Dimetrodon. So you had big spinachodontid carnivores preying on big edaphosaurid herbivores, and perhaps the big casid herbivores living on land and in water. This was the picture of the first big terrestrial ecosystems.
I always found this dynamic or this time interesting because you have both some of the dominant large herbivores and the major large carnivores using a, not identical, there's definitely differences, but very similar body design.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really interesting because you don't see that in a lot of other groups throughout Earth's history.
No.
Typically, predators are a very, you don't see giant grazing cats.
Right.
You don't see anything. And the herbivores, I mean, they have the same jointed legs, but they don't have at all the same body or even bones. They don't even have the same number of bones in their limbs anymore. So, this is really interesting because then it really brings to my mind that question of what was that sail doing? Because it was serving both of them, predator and prey, which is cool.
Indeed. And that gets into the last thing I want to mention about the pelycosaurs, and that is the question of their physiology.
Yes.
A lot of the things that define mammalia are what I have in my notes listed as soft stuff.
Yeah, squishy.
Things that don't fossilize. Predominant among those is warm-bloodedness, right? Warm-bloodedness is a combination of maintaining a high temperature, stable body temperature, high metabolism. We don't know when that started.
Yeah, because we identified mammal traits with living mammals, not fossils.
Yes. There has been some discussion about whether or not endothermy and related traits had shown up in the pelycosaurs. Classic arguments against this include the fact that they have a sprawling gait, which is a very lizard ectothermy thing to have. Evidence that they grew slowly, that their bones had low vascularization, which is something you tend to see in ectotherms, less space set aside for blood transport and things like that. Their fossils tend to be limited to the equatorial regions, which is something you see in big ectotherms. Cold-blooded animals need to live in warm places.
Yep.
And the sail. Many researchers have said, well, why would you need a big sail for thermoregulation if you're already able to maintain a stable body temperature?
There's a reason mammals don't bask in the sun, or at least most don't.
Exactly. So for a long time, people have said, yeah, no, these were probably ectotherms. However, there is some evidence for at least some pelycosaurs growing quickly. Look, you cut through the bone, you look at their histology, you can see high growth rates sometimes, higher vascularization, which is suggestive of a more active physiological system, right? Circulation, respiration, acting more in a mammalian way, in a more warm-blooded way.
It's trying to lean that direction.
I've seen hypotheses of a mammal-like diaphragm in certain pelycosaurs, right? The way that mammals breathe, it's not passive. It's not a passive breathing by any means, right? We are pumping my diaphragm muscles up and down to draw air in and out.
If you're going to have a high metabolism, you need to fuel it with oxygen.
Yes. And there's even been some suggested evidence of the sail not correlating with activity rate or body size or lifestyle, that the sail might not actually be linked to your physiology, which would mean that it is not a thermoregulation thing. That maybe it was for display or something else.
Which, once again, goes back to, it's kind of weird if the active hunting predator and the grazing herbivore are both using similar shaped, sized, and functioning sails. They're both using it for thermal regulation. It seems like the more active one would need a noticeably different sail.
Yes. So maybe the pelycosaurs were not quite as cold-blooded as you might think. It's possible that the earliest hints of endothermy were already showing up back in the early Permian, the earliest synapsids, which is a cool thought to see.
And that's something that things always treat ecto and endothermy, cold-blooded and warm-blooded, as you either are or you aren't, one or the other. But even in modern animals, there's a spectrum of different levels of these features. So you can have an animal that is kind of warmish blooded. Like the great white shark does not maintain its metabolism the way we do to keep a warmer body temperature, but its blood flow does. So as long as it's swimming, it is warmer than the water around it.
Yes.
So you get cool stuff like that where it's an animal that's better at utilizing heat, but may not be producing it through its metabolism. And that's a warm... if you took its temperature, it would come out like it was warm-blooded.
Yeah, and so it is, instead of being endothermic and homeothermic and high metabolism, it's partially endothermic but poikilothermic and low metabolism because there's multiple portions of... That's a different episode.
Oh, yeah. But that means that when these traits show up, they can show up in steps and stages and still be just as functional.
Absolutely. Now, all these early pelycosaurs are also living alongside some of the earliest reptiles, some of those fun, large-bodied amphibians that are super cool of that time. But as we move into the Middle Permian, one particular group of pelycosaurs differentiates themselves from the rest. In fact, they differentiate themselves so much that they don't get included in pelycosaurs. This is where the word pelycosaur ends, and we start talking about therapsids.
Yeah.
Somewhere either within the sphenacodonts, Dimetrodon and friends, or very closely related to them, you see this group called the therapsids evolve. The earliest therapsid, what you'll see often listed as the earliest therapsid, is an early Permian animal called Tetraceratops insignis. It's about 275 million years old. It's known from a single skull that's just a few inches long, from Texas, with 6 horns. Dramatic pause. Yes, it's called Tetraceratops, but it has 6 horns. Moving on.
Huh.
It was probably a small, very likely an insectivore or something like that, very much like how most of those pelycosaur groups started. But as we get into the Middle Permian, the therapsids start to differentiate and take off. And they come along with some interesting new features. So in a moment, I'll go through a number of the fun groups of therapsids, because there's some good ones, at least one of which that was specifically requested by one of our requesters. As we get into the therapsids, we start to see the legs are held more under the body. So less of the sprawling sort of lizard-like thing and more able to hold the legs more vertically. So think maybe not dog, but crocodile.
Yeah, where it's a high walk, but
not
that perfect. It not yet probably able to gallop.
Right. They also have, this is interesting, more symmetrical feet.
Oh.
Which is something you see in animals that are standing with their legs underneath them.
Yeah, I mean, if your legs aren't as out to the side, you need them to be more centralized.
Yep.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that.
So we're starting to see more of what's called the parasagittal stance, where you're holding your legs underneath your body, which is something you see in mammals and dinosaurs, actually. It evolved it independently. We also see in the therapsids at least the hints of 3 types of teeth. What, if they were mammals, we would call incisors, canines, and molars. Teeth with different jobs.
We're getting there.
What's really cool about this is that in modern mammals, particularly in placentals, the numbers of the teeth are very specific, right? Placental mammals never have more than 3 incisors in a quadrant, or 1 canine in a quadrant of the mouth. The therapsids were not so limited. There's a lot of therapsids that have groups of canines.
How many teeth do you want? How many teeth can you get?
Just keep adding those teeth.
Yeah. Keep them coming.
All just like 3 or 4 canines in a row.
That's fantastic.
Now, they are living aside the same amphibians. This is also the time we start seeing big reptiles like the parasaurs. And so that is what is competing with groups of therapsids such as the dinocephalians. Therapsids have cool names.
Yes, they do.
Dinocephalians means terrible heads.
And so accurate.
So dinocephalians are actually very diverse. There are herbivores, there are carnivores. Some were very small, some were quite large. There is a large carnivore called Titanophonius, which is big head, big teeth, 10 feet or so long, very similar to Dimetrodon, in fact. It doesn't have the sail, but as the sphenacodontian carnivores sort of dwindled out of the early Permian, these are the animals that took over that niche. These are the new dominant carnivores, and they have a very similar body shape. There's also big herbivores like Moscops. Moscops is great because Moscops is another one of these big herbivores that's like 10 feet long, has a giant body and just a silly little head. Boop! Sticking off the front of it. They've been suggested to have possibly been hippo-like, maybe even semi-aquatic, which is kind of cool.
That'd be interesting.
But of all the diversity of the dinocephalians, the reason they get their name is because they have these thick, knob-covered heads.
Just bulby and like it's just weird.
With these little horns and knobs and stuff on them.
And like flares.
A lot like pachycephalosaurs, actually. The head-butting dinosaurs with thick domes and knobs all around them. And it's been suggested that these were doing a similar thing, that these might have been head-butting or vying and wrestling with these knobbly heads of theirs.
Yeah. Interesting.
But the dinocephalians are pretty restricted to the middle Permian. And as you get toward the later Permian, they dwindle. And as you're dwindling your dominant carnivores, every niche invites a new entry. So a new group of therapsids came in to take over from the dinocephalians. These, if you've heard of anything other than Dimetrodon, you've probably heard of the Gorgonopsids.
Yes.
Gorgonopsids were the major carnivores of the late Permian. After the dinocephalian carnivores had dwindled, they are particularly well known in Africa. These are active predators. These are often reconstructed looking very dog or cat-like.
Yeah.
In sort of the way they hold themselves, the way that their bodies are shaped. The largest of them include Gorgonops and Inostrancevia and things like that, which were, some of them could be bear-sized.
Significant.
Like grizzly bear size, yeah. They have these long skulls with some of the first proper saber teeth. Up to a few inches long, sticking out of the mouth. Among all the other smaller sharp teeth, saber canines coming down from the top jaws.
Gorgonopsids did it first.
They sure did. And they're weird to look at because they do look very sort of saber-tooth cat-y, except they have kind of sprawling limbs, and they still have long tails.
Yeah. It very much is if you, like the cartoons, there's almost all 90s cartoons had some episode where a mad scientist had the devolution rays and stuff, and it made everything a reptile version of whatever it was they pointed it at. This does kind of have that feeling of if you pointed that ray at a saber-toothed cat, this is a very kind of more reptile-esque, even though not reptile, but it's got those features with that active cat-like predator design.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It certainly is. Gorgonopsids, by the way, are also, if you remember Walking with Prehistoric Beasts, that heavily featured Gorgonopsids. And if you've seen, I think it was the first episode of Primeval.
Pretty sure it was the first episode.
It had a Scutosaurus, which is a big reptilian parasaur, big reptilian herbivore, and a Gorgonopsid was the, quote, monster of that episode, which was pretty cool. It was like jumping on cars and stuff. But of course, if you have these big carnivore therapsids running around, you need herbivores. And the middle Permian into the later Permian therapsids gave rise to one of the most successful groups of herbivores in Earth history. These were the Dicynodonts.
Yeah.
Dicynodonts were these really cool therapsid animals. They show up in the mid-Permian, dominant herbivores in the late Permian. They are very widespread. They come in a variety of sizes, mouse-sized Dicynodonts all the way up to cow-sized Dicynodonts. They had beaks on the fronts of their mouths, another thing that has shown up over and over again in herbivores. Turtles, ceratopsians.
It's good for cutting up plants.
Mostly toothless, right? They were mostly using those beaks instead of front teeth to grab stuff, but they get their name in part from having tusks.
Little tusks.
These little tusks sticking out of their mouth. Effectively canines still, sticking out of their mouth. So we're seeing more of that teeth being adapted for different purposes, which is a very synapsid thing to do.
Also made an appearance in Primeval. They actually became reoccurring characters.
Yes, in fact, one of these, I think it was the one in Primeval, was Diictodon. I think that's who it was, which were these little, like, weasel-sized burrowers. These were burrowing
They show up in it, and they become a problem because they are burrowing through the drywall of the building they show up in.
Yes, that's right. One of the most famous Dicynodonts, which we mentioned in episode 45, is Lystrosaurus. This is one of the very famous disaster taxa that after the end Permian extinction became widespread in all this open ecospace. And indeed, one group of the Dicynodonts not only survived into the Triassic, but flourished through the Triassic. This is a group of animals that was still dominating herbivorous ecosystem, that ecospace, into the Triassic when you started to get reptiles finally catching up and rising up to take over more dominant ecological roles.
Yeah, they really held on for a while.
There is a genus called Placerius, which was the size of a cow in the late Triassic.
Awesome.
Which is, if these are starting in the middle Permian 260 or so million years ago, that's a run of over 50 million years that these animals managed to hold on to dominant herbivorous clade niches.
And especially with the Archosaurs stepping in to take in a lot of the dominant roles, having a big dominant herbivore from, I don't want to say like previous group, but from the dominant group of the previous period, they'd kind of be like if we had dog-sized monotremes running around today. Like,
yes,
that's significant. They are very successful.
Now, there's one more group that I want to mention from the therapsids. There's a lot of these, by the way. I'm not mentioning all of them. We're hitting on the major groups. These were super diverse. There was a group called the Therocephalians.
Yeah.
Which means beast heads, because synapsids get really cool names. Therocephalians were another group of carnivores, big skulls, powerful jaw muscles, showed up again, mid-Permian, made it through into the Triassic. The Therocephalians are also interesting for a few other reasons. First, here we are seeing some more hints of mammal-like physiology, mammal-like traits by Therocephalians. There's potential evidence of this earlier on in some of those other groups, but certainly within the Therocephalians, there's evidence for the secondary palate, the hard roof of the mouth that separates what's called I think it's the buccal cavity, the mouth cavity, from the nasal cavity. There's also possible evidence of respiratory turbinates. So if you ever get the chance to look inside the snout of a skeleton of a mammal, in the nose we have all these sort of, it looks like rolled up paper.
Yeah, like just very thin bones.
And those are nasal turbinates. And what they basically do is they increase surface area for, in some cases, smelling, olfactory tissue. And that seems to have been present as far back as the early synapsids, the pelycosaurs, but also in mammals for respiratory purposes. That you have increased your respiratory absorptive surface, which is something that is closely linked to our high metabolism, high respiratory lifestyle. It seems to potentially have arisen by these therocephalians, these later derived therapsids. There are also therocephalians that have these interesting pits in the bones of their snout that are potentially have been interpreted as possibly the roots for vibrissae. Whiskers! Maybe. It has also been pointed out that similar structures are found in animals, in like lizards.
Yeah.
So maybe not. Could be whiskers. Might not be whiskers. Along those lines, there is a late Permian coprolite, a fossil poo, episode 30, that has been found to contain what appears to be hair.
Nice.
Which seems to suggest that the late Permian therapsids, perhaps within the therocephalian group, had evolved hair.
That at least some of them were fuzzy.
Yes, which is super cool. And another thing that is often linked to warm-bloodedness.
Yeah.
To homeothermy, right? Maintaining your body temperature in mammals.
It's why wearing a jacket works for us, but wouldn't work for a lizard.
Yes, exactly. Your pet snake is not happy under a blanket. Well, it might be happy because it's dark and secluded, but it's not keeping it warm.
Mm-mm.
So, by the time we're transitioning into the Triassic, we are seeing more of these mammalian traits. And indeed, the therocephalians are a very close relative of a particular group called the cynodonts.
Important group.
And the cynodonts are going to take us into the final section of our trip through the synapsid family tree. Cynodonts show up in the late Permian. They continue through the Triassic. Indeed, they're still around today. Cynodonts, even the early cynodonts, look like mammals.
Yes.
So whereas, those early pelycosaurs, we would have said, you would have looked at it and said, that looks kind of like a weird lizard. Early cynodonts, you would have looked at and said, that looks like a weird mouse.
Yes.
Or a weird ferret.
Yes.
Now your basis of comparison would certainly be mammal. They have differentiated teeth, right? Definitely at this point, we've got lots of teeth differentiation. They definitely, cynodonts evolve a secondary palate. They definitely end up with the respiratory turbinates. There's evidence for the diaphragm having shown up. There are a number of cynodonts that have that possible whisker attachment area. Oftentimes you'll see artist reconstructions of cynodonts covered in fur.
Yeah.
These appear to be very much what you expect to see from the step before proper mammals.
Yeah.
And cynodonts were also super successful. Like, once again, another branch that they had lots of carnivores, some of which were the size of, like a fox, something like Procynasuchus, which was late Permian, Thrinaxodon, which is a very famous early proto-mammal from the early Triassic. Cynognathus in the middle Triassic was up to 4 feet long. So now we're looking at, bigger dog, right? Maybe medium-sized dog-sized animals. You also have herbivorous cynodonts, many of which had rows of cheek teeth for grinding up plants.
Cool.
Now we're looking like mammals, right? Messetognathus from the mid-Triassic of Brazil, and Exairodon, which was up to 6 feet long. These were big-ish, grindy-toothed, not quite mammalian herbivores. And one of my favorite things that you start noticing at this point, and it's sort of been a running trend up till now, a lot of these animals are named and identified by their jaws and teeth. which is such a mammal thing.
That's that is a very mammal habit to do.
Yes. And in case we haven't sort of gotten this idea across yet, if you're a paleontologist studying mammals, you study teeth.
Yes.
Teeth in mammals are so differentiated and so unique to different species that they're really good for identification, for ecology.
We have very specialized dentitions, and yeah, you can denote individual species quite easily with certain mammals.
Oh yeah.
And it's completely different than when you're studying things like reptiles.
Oh yeah. At least 3 of the species at the Gray Fossil Site were named off of teeth.
Yeah, and that's common practice. That's what we studied when we were taking our paleomammal courses.
Yes, exactly. In the late Triassic, one group of cynodonts, a very famous group, the Morganucodonts. You may have heard of Morganucodon, the animal that gives the name to this group. These are small nocturnal insectivores, also a very mammalian thing to be, small and nocturnal. Morganucodon is famous as a transition fossil. Now, everything we've been talking about up till this point is effectively a transition fossil. But the reason Morganucodon stood out when it was first discovered is that it has, yet again, a number of features. We've moving on from the early cynodonts to the late Triassic cynodonts. Morganucodon has incisors, canines, premolars, and molars.
4 important categories of teeth we still have today.
Yep. Morganucodon has evidence for a certain gland near the eye called the Harderian glands, which is a gland that today secretes fluids that are helpful in grooming and maintaining fur.
That's cool.
In mammals. So Morganucodon probably had fur.
Yeah, it was grooming itself. That's cool.
Yep. Morganucodon has 2 jaw joints, like its early amniotic, pelycosaur therapsid ancestors. It has the quadrate and articular still joining together at the base of the jaw. Those 2 bones are forming part of its inner ear structure, and they have become so reduced that the dentary, which is most of the lower jaw in Morganucodon, all of the lower jaw in mammals, is big enough that it articulates with the squamosal in the top of the skull, which is the joint connection that mammals have.
That's cool.
Morganucodon has both jaw joints, the early version and the later version, as one is taking over for the other.
That's cool to get to see that you're seeing part of the process of how it transitional species, how it transitioned from one joint to the other. Is it literally just one started to take more and more of the job away from the other one whilst both were still present, which is cool.
It is. Morganucodon also shows evidence of deciduous teeth.
Baby teeth?
Baby teeth.
Baby teeth?
And replace. Now that is as opposed to what is probably the ancestral version, which is just continuous tooth replacement.
Which is lots of teeth.
Which is what you can do when your teeth are unspecialized and they're simple to make and you could just crank them out.
If you're not using very specialized tools, you can mass produce them more easily.
Exactly. I've also seen it suggested that because there's evidence that Morganucodon grew rapidly as a youngster and didn't develop teeth right away in babies, which might be evidence that it was feeding its babies milk.
It was suckling.
So that's kind of cool.
Oh, this is awesome.
So where the late Triassic, our cynodonts have given rise to, now we're on the verge of mammals.
Yeah.
And indeed, by the early Jurassic period, just after 200 million years ago, just around that time, we see true mammals. The first proper true mammals in the fossil record. There are some animals like Adelobacillus and Hadrocodium, which are either very early mammals or very close to that, the origin of the clade. By this time, we know, because of what we have in modern mammals, that these first true mammals would have had the fully developed mammalian inner ear. They would definitely have been feeding their young milk, lactating in some way or the other, would have had proper mammalian endothermy, right? You're warm-blooded in the way that mammals are. It was also at this time that the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, with episode 15, had cleared the way for the rise of dinosaurs.
Yes.
So the vying between the synapsids and the archosaurs that happened throughout the Triassic, a victor was nominated. And as the Triassic came to a close, pretty much just about every group that was left over of the synapsids died out.
Yeah.
Leaving behind just a handful of pretty much cynodonts, which are the mammals and the mammaliforms, mammals and very near mammals that survived throughout the Mesozoic. Traditionally, we have considered these to be, these. It was thought that these were all very small, very mouse-like, crawling in the leaf litter, digging in the dirt, eating the scraps they could. But over the last several years, we've actually come to learn that Mesozoic mammals and near mammals were actually really diverse.
Yeah, they weren't doing too bad.
They weren't, dominant carnivores and herbivores, but you had things like the docodonts, which lived in the Jurassic, had very complex cheek teeth. This includes the famous Castorocauda, which was very beaver-like, thought to have been semi-aquatic. Some of this group were potentially diggers. Some might have been arboreal, living in trees. You have the Haramidins, which were gliders.
Which is so cool.
There was a whole bunch of gliding mammaliforms all throughout pretty much most of the Mesozoic era. You have the very famous multituberculates. These are very rodent-like. These are true mammals. Very rodent-like, but not rodents.
Yes.
They have these famous, ridiculous cheek teeth with just like each bump on a tooth is called a cusp, right? When you look at like a taper tooth, you have these cusps on the teeth. Multituberculates just had cusps on cusps on cusps. Just these ridiculous teeth.
We heard you like cusps.
We heard you liked cusps. They were actually super common in the late Cretaceous. Like these were the mice of their time.
Mm-hmm.
They survived to the Eocene. They were still around into the Age of Mammals. And of course, during the Cenozoic, through the Jurassic into the Cretaceous, we see the rise of three very familiar groups of mammals: the monotremes, the marsupials, and the placentals. These are the three groups that make up the full diversity of mammals that we have today. These are the three groups that after the KPG mass extinction, episode 5, would basically take over the world.
Yeah.
After a brief hiatus, synapsids dominated terrestrial ecosystems once again. Only this time they also took to dominating the oceans.
Yeah, playing the long
and the sky.
game.
And the age of mammals took hold, starting in after the end Cretaceous extinction. But that, of course, is a story for another time. From the beginning, from those early pelycosaur ancestors, through the development of more and more familiar traits to the mammals that run the world today, that's the breeze-by tour of synapsid history.
Yeah. Our history going back farther than most people realize it does.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, our roots were planted in those ridiculous forests of the Carboniferous.
Mm-hmm. And so I like this one because very much like looking at whale ancestors going from terrestrial to aquatic, it's very obvious as traits build up. You can see them becoming more whale-like as time goes on. You can see a very similar thing in synapsids where they're very reptile-y, and then they're weird reptile-y, and then they're almost like a 50-50 of traits. It's things we don't see today because now it's reptiles and mammals. And then more and more and more recognizable. Familiar, I should say.
Yes.
And it's a cool history to look through.
It certainly is. Now, before we wrap up the episode today, as listeners might know, sometimes we get patron questions.
Indeed.
Today we have one to answer right before we wrap it up. Today, our patron question is very fitting as we've wrapped up our October series, a speculative evolution question.
Oh boy.
This comes from Samuel, who asked, basically what Samuel's asking is, what if humans had precocial babies?
Yes.
Precociality describes, when you in his question, he says, what would it be like if we had babies like lizards? Just popped out, ready to go.
Yeah, just fully functioning, ready to potentially survive on our own.
Yes. So, Will, how do you think precociality would affect humanity?
It has a lot of effects. There definitely are chances that we could still be very human-like, because you do get, like, crocodilians have pretty significant parental care. They're not feeding the young, or at least there's very little evidence that does happen with most of them. But the big thing that really changes it is that we would no longer have to be learning, or at least learning as much from our elders and our peers. And that's the big thing that's different between most mammals and most reptiles, is that even if a baby alligator was left on its own with no protection for the mom, it would be more vulnerable, but it would not have trouble feeding itself. It would not have trouble knowing where to hide and knowing where to go and what to do. It comes out. It
knows how to be an alligator.
Yeah, it comes out all programs pre-downloaded. It is good, pre-installed. It is good to go.
It knows kung fu.
Yes. Mammals have to learn almost all of those things. Depending on the mammal, depends on how much. Some like your artiodactyls come out and are walking within a few minutes. But then things like us are basically mammal larvae. We're squishy and pink, and our bones aren't fully formed, and our eyes aren't working completely yet, and puppies don't even open their eyes for the first portion of their life. Mammal babies are pretty useless, other than to start growing and eating and very quickly learning. Like, we're supercomputers in how quickly we're downloading information as babies.
Yeah. Well, I think that in order for humans to be precocial, we'd have to develop, one of the reasons that we give birth so early in our development is that, pregnancy is long enough. Like, a human pregnancy is a long pregnancy compared to most mammals, because there's so much development to do.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have to either have a longer pregnancy or develop very differently to be ready to go right off the bat, and that would probably involve sacrificing things like brain development.
Yeah.
If you want to develop your legs to be able to carry your body, you need to spend less time growing that ridiculous head.
Well, it's one of the reasons that marsupials are so different from other mammals, and oftentimes have crazy back legs but not crazy front legs, because their front arms develop when they're still fetuses to crawl into the pouch.
Yes, and latch on to the nipples.
So you have to cook those first, which means you don't have all that extra time in the womb to make them crazy awesome mole arms and things as often.
Oh, yeah.
The thing that comes to mind for me is, I wonder if we were born ready to go, but still were intelligent species, I wonder if we would function more like cephalopods, like an octopus, because octopus and cephalopods, or many of them, are extremely intelligent. We talked about this when we talked about cephalopods.
Episode 16.
And they're different because they, unlike mammals and unlike intelligent birds, like crows, are not learning from their peers and their parents, because the parents die at mating and birth. So they are incredible problem solvers, but they're not big at the building up communal knowledge. You can put an octopus in a situation and it will trial and error until it figures out the solution very, very quickly, often much more quickly than other smart mammals, because that's how their brain, they are learning by themselves on the go, and they're antisocial, so they're not even learning from one another, peer level. They're learning just on their own. I wonder if humans would be very much like that, to where we are very good problem solvers, and we if we keep some of the social aspects, which is not impossible, you could have social egg layers. There's no reason you can't. But I wonder if we would just be very quick learners with less of that communal memory as often, or something.
Yeah, the last thing that I would say on that is that I think we might lose a lot of that sociality.
Potentially.
Because I feel like such a big part of human culture, and a lot of mammals really, like a big part of the reason you stick together is to take care of the young, and to your tribe or your pride or your herd really does revolve around raising the family. And so in humans, I do wonder if we would have gotten to a societal level where we are now if we didn't have that family tie keeping us together.
If you can move out at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, then why would we stay home as often? Why would we stay with? Because like even with alligators and crocodiles, who are some of the best parental caregivers within the reptile world, it's still only at max a couple years.
Yeah,
and they live as long as we do, so that's not due to a faster lifespan. They live same amount of time as us, but they're born ready to go. So once they get a couple feet long, okay, I got more babies to make.
Yes. Well, and then you start, and now this is a totally other conversation, and we'll wrap it up here because this is in the episode.
You asked a speculative question.
We mentioned this in the last episode, I think in one of our news pieces. One of the reasons gators go away from their parents is because if you're precocial, you start competing with your parents.
Yes, you do.
So I wonder if young humans would have to move away, especially if we don't have a society, like we do today. You got to leave because you're going to start taking the food or the resources or the jobs.
I was going to say, toddlers will start stealing the jobs.
Yeah, right? Like if you're precocial and ready to go, there's not going to be child labor laws.
Well, and it would be very interesting because an octopus is one of the few precocial intelligent animals. Like almost all other highly intelligent animals have a long childhood, or a noticeable one.
Right. You got to grow that brain.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to see what research there is on octopus memory. Like how long is it? How complicated is it? How detailed? Like they only live for a very short amount of time, which is the biggest difference. And so I wonder if a long-lived animal like us, but being born ready to go, if we would have the same need for a long memory, because now you don't need to remember the lessons necessarily you learned at 5 because you already have those.
Right.
Be interesting.
Hey, thanks, Samuel. That was a cool question.
That was fun. And also
always up for some speculative evolution.
Creepy to think of babies literally just being ready to run around. Like that's.
I'm picturing this whole time I've been picturing the dino human.
Yes. Yeah.
That Troodon thing. Yeah.
Because
that we talked about in. When did we talk about? Oh, that was episode 39. That was the speculative evolution episode. Anyway.
Really quick side note for everyone. If we were born precocial, that also probably means we'd be different proportion and we'd be more like just a tiny adult.
Yes.
Not this chubby, big-headed baby. We'd be a little bit different. We'd probably have a slightly bigger head and bigger eyes because that's normal. But we'd basically look like a little person walking. So you'd have like 2-foot tall people.
Just crawling out of the womb,
just walking around and
like just pulling yourself out. The doctor, like during birth, you just hold your hand out and the little baby's hand would come out and grab yours.
Yes,
and you just
thank
help him
yes,
out.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. I was having some trouble there.
No,
I don't like it anymore.
You'd have to have clothing ranges from.
They would have to be able to communicate, too.
Yeah. Would our language be different? Would we have as complex language? Would we be able to have that pre-downloaded?
It's just come out like, mother, father.
Because if you're born ready to go, typically those animals don't have as much language as we do. It's more...
We'd come out...
Yeah, we'd have 50 words instead of millions.
Croc, get job.
Yeah.
Croc, take aptitude test.
Yes.
Listeners, thank you for putting up with us. This was a fun episode. So this is one of those episodes where every section of this episode is its own episode topic. So as always, if you want to hear more about any of the things we've covered here, let us know. We take your requests in all the normal places. Listen to the outro message for the ways to reach us.
Look forward to that precocial human episode.
Yeah. Thank you to our patrons for supporting us, like Samuel. Thank you to our requesters who requested the topic of the episode. It was awesome. Thank you to you for listening. We release new episodes every fortnight, so stay tuned later in this month for another episode. Keep your eye out for that Q&A submission form that we'll be putting up. We're approaching the end of the year.
Yeah, it's coming
It's
up.
pretty exciting. We will see you all next time
On Common Descent.
Find out next time on the Common Descent podcast. After like 3 years of Common Descent, we'll release Common Descent Z.
Yeah, I was like, it is a 90s kid thing. Like, not to be one of those people that's like, you're real 90 kids if you're... But every time I hear next time on, my brain immediately goes, Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah. We'll release Common Descent Z. It'll be very much like the regular Common Descent, except there'll be a lot more filler.
And yelling.
And yelling. There's going to be yelling all the time. Hello, Will! Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.